to sign, that would be very restrictive. And very good. Brest-Litovsk. What day did the war end?
11/11/1.
It was a Monday.
I got a little caught up on the 11s. 11/11/18 and 11/18.
It was a beautiful Monday. It was cold. And they met at Versailles, correct? Actually, they met at Paris. And the treaty negotiation was in Paris. And there would be 4 separate treaties. But we lump them all together as Versailles, because that's where they forced the Germans to do it. A little bit of revenge against the Germans. And actually, the Germans would have to do this surrender in a railway car, a place called Compiègne. At a railway car, they made the Germans sign the armistice there. And the reason I mention that is because after France, when France signed an armistice, basically a surrender in 1940 to Nazi Germany, Hitler made him sign it there. And there's a little bit of revenge going back and forth. They just never forget these things. And so, where's my pen? Did we get to the big 4?
No. I feel like we just finished the problems with collective security.
Oh, collective security, that was Article 10. And that was, they thought they would do that, but in reality, the 14 points, they were naive. They weren't going to work. In fact, Clemenceau, did I tell you what Clemenceau said about it? Because that I did not say. So Clemenceau, the French premier, when he saw Wilson in his 14 points, and he just looked at things, and he said, Wilson has his 14 points. God has only 10. We'll see. And so these were, in reality, propaganda. It sounded good. Germany thought that's what happened. But when Versailles actually happened, so let's get to what's going to ultimately be the Treaty of Versailles. The men in Paris, it's going to be 4 treaties. The other 3 are going to be with the other powers, basically Austria, the New Hungary, and Bulgaria. But since Versailles is with Germany, we lump it all together with that. Back in 1871, Germany would proclaim, or a new Germany would proclaim themselves an empire after defeating the French in the Franco-Prussian War at Versailles. And so that's why the French are going to make them sign at Versailles. This just kept going around, this never-ending little bits of revenge and make up for slights and humiliations, which of course Versailles is going to do it. And there's going to be 4 leaders for 4 countries that are going to be, in fact, they'll double the big 4. And the ones we got to get to, of course, the U.S. And President Wilson would be the first American president to leave the United States and go to another country while president. And a lot of people said, don't do it, because he's going to be forever tied to this treaty. And the other thing is this. Wilson can negotiate, but then it's got to go back to the United States. Wilson has a big problem. It's got to go back to the United States for ratification. And the Senate ratifies it with a 2/3 vote. That's in the Constitution. 2/3. Now then it becomes law. Well, in 1918, the election had literally just happened when the war ended, and the Republicans did very well. And there was Republican majorities in both houses of the Senate. The Senate's one we care about. Wilson, as a Democrat, should have been thinking strategically that January 1919 when he left, but he didn't. Wilson brought no Republicans. He brought no Republicans at all with him. He brought nobody from the Senate. In fact, Wilson brought no experts. He didn't bring anybody who knew about European history or economics. Wilson really went there almost blind. Yet, despite his lack of knowledge, he really believed he knew everything. He had maybe the worst combination of being ignorant and arrogant at the same time. Clemenceau, the French premier, just was in awe of how little Wilson did. But no Republicans, especially Henry Cabot Lodge. Henry Cabot Lodge was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He actually wanted an international body like the League of Nations. And so even though he didn't like Wilson, he could have been an ally, but Wilson snubbed him. And so Lodge is going to demand Wilson's humiliation when Wilson gets back. You see problems coming up? Well, Wilson believed he could somehow get these 14 points, whatever that meant. I don't know what that meant either. The big thing is he wanted the League of Nations. In fact, very quickly, 14 points, the main parts of it are going to be thrown out. They'll give lip service to it. They'll talk about maybe no secret treaties. They didn't talk about any of the arms race, but everybody knew all these different countries have their own point of view. France, the biggest player, the biggest contribution to the war, argue they won the war, that's why the treaty was in Paris, the negotiation. Their president, their premier, Georges Clemenceau. And Clemenceau, an old socialist, an old tiger, or the old lion, sorry, he would do whatever it took. The treaty had to make sure that it weakened Germany. He was terrified for very good reason that Germany would do it again. He was alive when he was in the 70s. He was alive when Germany created the German Empire, humiliating France in the Franco-Prussian War. Yeah, France won, but France suffered a lot. Germany was a bigger country, it might come back. Now, a lot of people are going to accuse him for wanting only revenge. Yeah, he wanted revenge. But the big thing was weaken Germany. So all that stuff about self-determination and all that, Clemenceau didn't care as long as they made sure there wasn't another war. Next, Britain. Britain suffered a lot, but remember, this is in France, in Belgium. Their prime minister was a man by the name of Lord George. And he looked at it as, we must preserve the empire. Britain lost power relative to where they were before the war. They knew they were weaker. And so there was almost this desperate idea that we need to protect and even expand our empire. Now, in the long run, this will be fallen. And after World War II, they'll be weakened even more relative to the rest of the world, and we'll lose the whole thing. And they'll never get even close to that power they were in 1914. Now, this war, everybody lost power except the United States and Japan. And lastly, Italy. Italy came in there assuming that they would get everything they wanted. Vittorio Orlando was their premier, and he was promised in secret agreements this land right here, and this whole coast, and all these other places. Islands here, places in Africa. And so that's what he wanted, all of these things. Italy suffered horribly in this war. 1.5 million casualties. They were almost knocked out in 1917, a battle called Capreto right here. I mean, they barely made it. And so their point of view is, we sacrificed, we came in the war to help you, we helped you win, we deserve it. Almost immediately, Orlando was ignored. They made this big procession of the big four, meeting and going to various hotels where they did the negotiation, and Orlando was snubbed. In fact, he would go back to Rome. And for a while there, he was treated as kind of this hero, but then pretty soon he was, well, then who's there for us? And the whole thing fell apart. He would eventually go back to the treaty, but just basically he felt humiliated. Italy felt snubbed at the Treaty of Versailles. This will lead directly, you combine with their sacrifice, and snubbing, they didn't get the land they promised. They got this, and a little bit here, but not here. In fact, they almost went to a war of a place called Fiume. Long story. But this will lead directly to the development of fascism and Benito Mussolini. Once again, we felt snubbed. We were not treated like we should. Our honor's at stake. One more country we didn't mention, but was a great power, Japan. Now, Japan knew that they're not going to be the same because most of the fight, treated the same because most of the fighting was in Europe. But Japan got there, assuming they would get huge land concessions in Asia to increase their empire. Japan didn't get it. Japan too felt snubbed. And this humiliation will grow, especially in the late 20s and into the 1930s with the Great Depression. You can see places where World War II is not like a direct sequel, but it's pushing to World War II. Who isn't here? Oh, almost forgot. Let me get to this first. A couple more people were there who believed in this idea of self-determination. This war will be made a better place and people can decide their own fate and they won't fight these type of wars for empire again. And two ones we need to know would be the American civil rights leader, W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, he was one of the few who really pushed hard against Jim Crow. He would be the founder in America 10 years before the war of the NAACP. Anyone know what the NAACP stands for? We'll get to it again when we get to the 1950s. It's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In the 1960s, the word colored would be not only considered passé, but almost racist, and no longer would that be, in fact, African Americans think it is racist. You know, it's complex because it was always used as kind of an insult, a way to put you down. You're a different color, so you're colored. But in 1907, it was just seen to represent blacks. You see the same thing with the word Negro. In the early 1960s, it was considered to be, well, it's better than colored. And pretty soon that was seen as, oh, wait a second, Negro and black, same. The word nigger comes from Negro, and that would quickly be used.
Was he the founder of it? Or just
Yeah, he was a founder.
Okay.
He went there saying, we got to get rid of Jim Crow laws. How can we say we want self-determination? Doesn't it apply to the U.S. too? In fact, he thought this would be a great idea. This would be a way for the U.S. to get rid of Jim Crow laws and say it's because of the war. Well, Wilson was the most racist president in American history. You think anyone listened to him? He also came there saying, what about Africa? What about those colonies in Africa? Shouldn't they be independent now? Of course, he's not going to be listened to. He's not the only one, but we mention him because of his relationship to U.S. history. And one more person we got to get down because, once again, direct relationship to the United States. A man who would take the name Ho Chi Minh, former teacher, freedom fighter, revolutionary. He wanted Asian colonies, especially the one he lived, which was a kind of a big, massive colony called French Indochina. And he wanted them to become independent countries. What country? He's Vietnam, yep. And he would eventually become a socialist freedom fighter. And the United States is eventually going to get involved in that conflict. A civil war in the area he did not control, South Vietnam. Yeah.
So what did he want?
He wanted Asian colonies to be independent, especially Vietnam. And he would partially succeed in his lifetime to get an independent North Vietnam, but then the U.S. would put a puppet government in South Vietnam. That'd be the Vietnam War.
What's that letter? M-I?
NH.
NH?
Yeah. That's all right. I'm gonna write ends like that for now. All right. But not only that, they would be in the Middle East, and people representing Arabs who were promised independent states out of the Ottoman Empire, and they're going to be ignored. It's going to happen all over. When it came right down to it, they talked big, but in reality, everybody wanted just certain things for their own direct influence, or their, of direct importance for their country. And so then let's get to the treaty itself, because very quickly it devolved into madness. In fact, nobody's going to be happy with this treaty. Over 1 million people came out, Europeans, to celebrate, to cheer Wilson when he arrived that January of 1919. He was going to bring peace. His 14 points became kind of like a symbol for world peace. In June, when the treaty was signed, the 4 treaties, they had to sneak them out in the middle of the night. Nobody is going to be satisfied with this treaty. Nobody. And one important thing to understand while this is going on, I'll get to the Spanish flu when I get to the end of the war. But Now we have this worldwide pandemic. It's chaos in Eastern Europe and Germany. Absolute chaos. They're negotiating here. Germany at that moment was breaking up into little countries and fighting a civil war. There was a communist rebellion in Berlin, for example. There's fighting all over for who's going to get what land here. They're going to say these countries can be independent, but they're going to fight it out over their borders. And then the horrific Russian Civil War. And I'm not even talking about what's going on. Well, heck, there's war between Greece and Turkey at this time, the very new country of Turkey. It's just a madhouse. So they're doing this with this idea that, I mean, really there's this fear Bolshevism or something is going to just take over everything. It had to be just a surreal time. Combine that with 20 million people dying of the flu, and also that number of people dying of the war. What a horrific moment. So, what happened with the treaty itself? What is going to be in the treaty? First off, they did come up with new borders in Eastern Europe. Not completely. They made up borders, and then they would fight it over out over the borders. For example, they specifically said Poland, and this is going to be a massive country of Poland, but they'll eventually win these borders in 1920 and 21. They'll take all this land. Same thing with the Serbs would finally get their state, and it's going to be called Yugoslavia, the kingdom of the Serbs, or the country of the Serbs. Not Serbs, I say Serbs, the country of the Slavs, with a Serbian king. That's going to break up right after the Cold War, into madhouse war. Just kept going. And same thing with all these areas here. But to give you an idea how complicated this was, here's Poland. So the idea of nationalism, it's the country of the Poles, right? This is where the Poles have their country. Less than 60% of the population of Poland were actually Poles. We have Ukrainians, Slovakians, Russians, Lithuanians, and all these people here, Germans. And that's not even counting the massive population of Jews that live in Poland. Most of the Jews in Russia were forced to live in this area right here, what used to be Russia. And so they moved into Poland. And so it was not, it wasn't this one country. And they're all the same way. You know, Czechoslovakia is going to be Czechs, Slovaks, but there's Poles. These are Ukrainians here. And there's Hungarians and Romanians and Transvaals. It's a madhouse. If I said madhouse enough, one more time. It's a madhouse. Well, new borders. Next, mandates. What they decided was all of these countries that had colonies, all these empires that had colonies, they're going to lose them. And so German colonies will become mandates of the League of Nations. The Ottoman Empire is going to be broken up into separate colonies, and these colonies are going to be mandates. Mandates, in essence, become colonies. So, for example, they're going to create a Syria for France. There was Syria. That was a province of the Ottoman Empire, but it became a French colony. Lebanon became a French colony for Syrian Christians. You don't even know these. I'm just telling you mandates. Give you an idea. Palestine, they just kind of cut this off. This is Palestine. We dub it Palestine. Jordan, Iraq, which would become a protectorate. Saudi Arabia didn't, because they figured who'd want to live there with just a desert. So we gave it to some poor little king, the Saud family, who carried the entire treasury of the country in a box around his neck. Things have changed in Saudi Arabia, at least for the royal family. No one still lived. But all of it became mandates. And technically they would be administered till they're independent, but what are they going to become? Colonies.
So what are mandates?
Mandates mean there will be, those would happen to the colonies. Mandates would be areas administered by the League members. They just divvied up the old colonies. Is that what you're going to ask too, Eamon?
Yeah.
So for example, too, the German colony at Tanganyika is going to become, it's going to broken up into 3 colonies. A British colony, they'll call it Tanzania. And then, have you heard of Rwanda? That was going to be a Belgian mandate out of Tanganyika. They just go, okay, Belgium needs something, we'll just kind of make a little circle and that's Belgium. There's no real reason for it. And Burundi, same deal. We'll get out of Belgium soon. They fought so much, we'll give them a colony. That'll cause no problems there. Don't worry. There was no thought process about these borders. It's just that Britain wanted Iraq here, and that's what they got. So, mandates. Next. We look, there's other areas, but the part that concerns us most is then, what about Germany? Now remember, they kept the blockade going throughout the entire time they negotiated. All 6 months of the negotiations of the treaty, Germans are still starving, and Austrians too. They allowed some food in, but to the German memory, they're killing thousands. And the German representatives who came for this new, well, Germany was in the process kind of a civil war, but eventually they're going to create a democratic republic, kind of, called the Weimar Republic. Don't worry about that. But the point is, German representatives were there, they were totally ignored. But they had to stay because of that blockade. I mean, there's stories of them either literally just sitting in their hotel lobby, just sitting there in the lobby while they're negotiating behind closed doors, and then just the Germans are just kind of sitting there. Or they're up in their rooms swearing, basically. In fact, there's stories about the big three doing the borders, and there's a billiards table in one of the lobbies that had shut off, so they're just at a big billiard table. I think I mentioned this before, but it's kind of a pool table, but there's no hole. It's just a big table, about twice the size of a pool table you would see someplace or even have at home. And they laid out a map of Europe. These guys were on the table. God, Clemenceau was in the 70s, but they had colored pencils and they were like drawing borders of their imaginary Europe. That's kind of what they were doing, which was crazy. They were fighting it out. The reality was much different in the East. But what of Germany? France wanted it to make sure that Germany could never do it again. And the rest of the countries, Britain and the United States, well, okay, Germany would be punished, but almost immediately they're thinking, nah, we're going to help France too. That'll help France too much. We don't want to help France too much. Almost immediately you have this, with Clemenceau just almost begging them to do something, and Wilson and Lloyd George hemming and hawing. Especially because Wilson knew nothing about European history and Lloyd George knew next to nothing about European history. And Clemenceau was just exasperated. But the first thing was the War Guilt Clause. And the War Guilt Clause is important because Germany was going to be made to accept full 100% responsibility for the war. Now you could argue they deserve most responsibility, but by no means did they deserve it all. What about Austria, or for that matter, this whole alliance thing, that the world's far too complex. But when they did this, this would give, or this would justify all the rest of the treaty. Because once Germany admitted that they caused the war, then we could do this other stuff. This is going to stick with Germany in the next 20 years after this. How dare you make us do it? In fact, when those negotiators were first presented this, and they were appalled by the treaty, the thing they hated the most was this. And they threatened to leave, but they couldn't because of that blockade. Does anybody want to guess what's going to happen to those 6 negotiators? They're all alive still in 1933 when Hitler took power. What's that? A number of them would die in concentration camps, but that's what would happen for the concentration camps. But next, they lost all their colonies and some land in Europe, especially land to Poland. Land to Poland. Okay, so Poland got all this land here. And you notice this from the map. I have to record about, get your map. And that's why I wanted you to do this, give you an idea how crazy this is going to become out of what was there before. But you notice how Germany's split in two now. They wanted to give Poland access to the sea. So they gave Poland this finger of land. Almost all the people who lived there were Germans. Prussians, which are Germans. And then we have 2 parts of Germany. I understand the logic to it, but this is going to infuriate Germans and also give Poland a real weakness. What do we do about this big population of Germans who want to be part of Germany?
Why did they go to the side of Lithuania and not break with Germany?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. So you do it here, but then do you take, okay, you take this part of Germany, do you take this from Lithuania, a new country that didn't start the war? You see the fall, so we're gonna punish Lithuania for what Germany did? You're exactly right. For thinking that, that's a good idea. And then you start looking at the possibility, no, they just want to punish Germany. This will be the excuse that Hitler is going to give in 1939 to attack Poland, beginning of World War II. They call it the corridor. Obviously, we'll get to that later. Once again, it isn't directly, World War II isn't the direct sequel to World War I, but it's, Next, colonies, war guilt. Something else, and it's important. What happened to the German military? What happened to them? Yeah, they dramatically decreased the size of their army, their armed forces. And so, Anna's right, 100,000 soldiers. Remember they had 4.5 million men when the war began? This will, well, it's going to anger the army, the remnants of the army, so they have a lot of officers left in their very small army. But so much of what made Germany powerful was that army. Now you're taking away their national identity. And they have enemies. They know that the Bolsheviks have always eyed Germany as a special place. And they want it back. And now they feel defenseless. One of the ways Hitler is going to be able to consolidate power is he promised the generals, the army, we will rebuild. We will be bigger than what we were before. That should never were, but they said they would. But I'll give you another example. No tanks, no Air Force. They couldn't, remember those big battleships, the dreadnoughts? No dreadnoughts, but what was the one naval weapon that Germany used? No submarines, yeah. You don't even know, I mean, the point about that is they greatly limited their military, creating a lot of resentment. And one more. There's others, but the ones we got to get to. Oh, it's kind of funny. I'll get to it here. Reparations. Reparations, that means money. And Germany's going to have to pay for the war. Now, reparations isn't just to rebuild. Part of it would be we're going to rebuild France and Belgium. In fact, that's where you get kind of humorous. The reparations, when they eventually came up with them, would be things like, for the French government, I just put this out, like, it's going to be money, but also 500 stallions, 30,000 fillies and mares, 2,000 bulls, 90,000 milk cows, 10,000 or 100,000 sheep. To Belgium, 5,000 mares, 5,000 fillies, 50,000 milk cows, 40,000 heifers, 15,000 sows. To the new Saud kingdom, they had to give 20 camels. And so it wasn't just money, it was also to rebuild, even though Trump could just buy it. The reparations weren't just to rebuild, it was also to hurt the German economy. France wanted to make sure that if the German economy was weakened, they couldn't attack again. Hurt the German economy. Britain and the United States were reluctant. They didn't want to punish Germany that much. They thought Germany might resent this. They also didn't want to make France too strong. They were once allies, now might be a threat. Almost immediately, Britain and France went back to hating each other. Heck, the United States made plans to attack Canada. I'm not making that up. What a weird world, huh? Well, the reparations. So they never set an exact amount. There had to be commission. They created a commission and eventually came up in US dollars, about 33 billion US dollars. At that time, Germany must pay. That's about 900 billion today. So a lot of money. And the thing was this. It was enough to hurt the German economy but not destroy it. But you combine this with all the rest, and it was enough to make Germany furious. Germany is going to want revenge for this, as they saw this was a punishment to Germany. And arguably part of it was. Germany will be, in fact, that's all they'll talk about, Versailles. And so any politician who can say, I will get revenge for Versailles, will move up in the ranks of the German government. Then when the Great Depression hit and their economy collapsed, That's what leads to him. It'll make Germany great again. I'll get you a job, and we'll do something about Versailles. That's what brought him to power. So, one more thing. In there, though, was the League. Wilson did not get much of what he wanted, but he focused on the League. Almost certainly, he contracted the Spanish flu. And he got very sick, and it appears as though this would trigger a series of strokes that would culminate in a horrific stroke back in the US. And so he was weakened, and he already didn't know much and wasn't very well advised. So he just focused on, just get my lead, just get my lead. So the League of Nations would happen. And remember, that's going to be diplomacy. Using diplomacy, a place where the countries can get together and solve problems together. Together. But what was the most controversial part? Collective security, what article is that? Article 10 of the Treaty of Versailles was that collective security. And once again, the idea is, that's supposed to be a C. The idea is we will all come together and solve the problems. We will work together. Actually, the big element about Article 10 is you wouldn't need it. It will deter aggression because we will stop it. And Wilson just thought, okay, nobody's going to be crazy enough to go to war and do this again. Britain and France already looked at this as like, yeah, we'll use it if we want, but we're still going to do what we want. I don't care what the League says. And that's going to be the problem with the League of Nations, why it's going to collapse in the 1930s. But this was included in the treaty. Signed, nobody was happy. Germany was forced to sign this at Versailles. They went back home, furious. What other great power was mad, and they weren't even invited? Huh? Not even invited. Yeah, they're that somewhere. Who's the government of Russia in 1919? So, and the Soviets would eventually win, but they're in 1919 when that happened. It looked like the whites might win. Actually, while the treaty was negotiated, a white army was advancing towards St. Petersburg. That's why they moved the capital to Moscow, the Bolsheviks did. They kept it there. Kind of the traditional capital of Russia, anyways. This will be big. Stalin, when he took power in 1924, would use this as proof he can't trust the West. And in 1939, Stalin would sign a treaty with Hitler. An alliance. We'll get to that, obviously. But you see this whole point where you have all these resentments, humiliations, everybody wants to get back at their enemy. There's nothing more dangerous than somebody that feels slighted. Builds. And this would do it. So, Wilson would go back to the United States, and here's we have the Ratification Battle. You need that 2/3 vote, and he's already made everybody angry. Now, there's two groups we need to talk about, though. Liberals and conservatives. Now, don't think in terms of economic. Even though they do apply, but remember, we're not conservative economics is more that laissez-faire economics. Liberal economics, a little bit more government intervention. Social Darwinism fits in this, but you could have somebody who's very liberal economically and conservative foreign policy and vice versa. So we're talking foreign policy-wise. And this is a new thing for the United States, because the United States always used to be pretty conservative foreign policy-wise. But now, because now we're in the world. Well, liberal foreign policy, liberals were very conflicted by this treaty. Very conflicted. Two big parts they were conflicted with. First off, they were terrified about the treatment with Germany. Terrified by the treatment with Germany. They thought if you treat Germany like this, Germany will be mad and have a reason for revenge. And this will lead to another war. And they had an example right there where the treaty was. France wanted revenge for when they lost 50 years earlier. But the South had this feeling after the Civil War. You would see the same kind of idea. This will cause real problems in Germany. So they were fearful about, liberals thought we're treating Germany too rough. In fact, what they said is we have to help their new liberal government. They have a democratic government, we have to help them. If we punish the new government, that might lead to a dictatorship and more war. As it turned out, the liberals were right about this. Now, how did conservatives feel about the treatment of Germany? That was the part of the treaty that conservatives liked. What they believed, it's punishment. Germany was wrong, they need to be punished. Because if they're not punished, they'll do it again. In fact, the analogy they use is like a little child. If a little child acts up, you gotta punish him, or they'll do it again. Now the problem with that is countries aren't children, and children don't have armies. That'd be kind of scary for a child. But what about the League? How did liberals feel about the League? Another way to look at it is, who was more pro-League? Who looked at the League as a positive thing? That's supposed to be the word League. Is the League of Nations more liberal, or is it more conservative? Yeah, very pro-League. It is a liberal idea that we can get together and solve things diplomatically. In fact, a liberal would argue, for a couple of reasons, that's much better. Obviously, diplomatically, we solve a problem before it goes to war. Everybody benefits. Everybody gets stronger then, because you can, if you then can solve your problems diplomatically, you can encourage trade and interaction between countries. And also, diplomacy is not, to a liberal, a sign of weakness. You're not weak. You're not giving in. You're negotiating the best deal. So this is good. Working together. Article 10 is scary, but the idea is if we have Article 10, then working together, we won't have to fight wars. We'll stop them before they happen. And so liberals are, liberal foreign policy want more diplomacy. They want the League. They believe in that idea of working together. So, conservatives. Conservatives, by their very nature, what a more conservative person is, fears diplomacy. They fear it. Why? A couple reasons. The fear that it gives you a weak, it makes you look weak. Oh, I almost forgot something for this. They want diplomacy. So the idea is you work together, a coalition. A coalition of countries working together will be stronger and deter aggression. But it's weak. But also, conservatives fear, for valid reason, you could argue, depending on your point of view, you can see these. If you start using diplomacy, you're going to get involved in all kinds of foreign entanglements. And what they wanted was isolationists. They don't want to work in a coalition, isolation. And so if we do have to act, it will be unilateral, which means one country alone. Unilateral. We're on our own, we do it on our own. And that is the difference between liberal and conservative. And you can see people with some conservative ideas, but they go off on some liberal ideas, and they, just like economics, like in a lot of things, they cross. But this is weak. And so the US will act alone if it has to. And so that's where you get fear of the League. And what did all their fears coalesce around them for conservatives? Article 10. Article 10. The more conservative, the more they feared Article 10. That idea that the League could vote and send American troops to war when they don't want to go to war. And so, that's when Wilson got back, the Senate divided up into 3 groups. The biggest group is going to be the reservationists, but we'll get to the 3 groups. The first one is Wilson. Wilson and loyal Dems. They got together, and Wilson believed that my treaty is the best. He didn't want to go back and negotiate, you know how tough it was. He didn't want to make any changes. What he said is, we have to sign the treaty as is, no additions, no changes. The word they used, no reservations to the treaty, specifically to Article 10. We're not going to change. We can't change. And Wilson saw this as a personal insult. How dare you say all the work I did was wrong? And then you have the biggest of all the groups were reservationists. Now, the reservationists are liberals. Obviously, if they don't want reservations, Article 10, Wilson, foreign policy-wise, is a liberal. Does that make sense? So Wilson is liberal. Reservationists, they're fairly liberal. But they want reservations to Article 10. They believe we need something in there in Article 10 that says Americans don't have to fight wherever the League says. Specifically, what they're talking about is the Constitution. The Constitution says Congress declares war. Congress declares war, and they want something in there that says we just can't force our troops to go to war. So they're liberal, but not as, but they still have some conservative fears about, and they want to say isolation. Yeah.
So they wanted to change the Constitution?
No, they wanted to change the Treaty of Versailles, add something to the Treaty of Versailles that will align Article 10 to the Constitution.
Okay.
So they want something there that says Congress has the last voice, not the League.
Okay.
Lastly, and this is by far the biggest group, most are Republicans. Oh, the leader of this, the man he snubbed, Henry Cabot Lodge. And you know what Lodge wanted? He wanted Wilson to go hat in hand and like go to his knees and beg. That's what he wanted Wilson to do. And of course, Wilson would never do that. And lastly, very conservative foreign policy-wise, total isolationists, the irreconcilables. And the irreconcilable said, no treaty at all. If we sign this treaty, we're in the League, and next thing you know, we're fighting in Europe again in 20 years. No way. Well, as it turned out, yay, they have a point. But also, if you don't do anything, you might get thrown into a war, which is exactly what happened in World War II. So they're right, but as it turns out, for the wrong reasons. And no treaty, conservative, isolationists. We can't sign the treaty because we can't have the League of Nations, and Article 10 is an abomination. Well, what happened? 3 big votes in 1919 into 1920. The first vote, Wilson's version, no reservations. And what happened? Not even close. Both these groups voted against it. Next one, with reservations. What happened? Voted against, didn't pass. Then Wilson had that horrendous stroke I mentioned. He was totally incapacitated for almost half of 1920. In fact, they kept this secret. His wife kind of ran the affairs of state, while Wilson was just bedridden, couldn't talk. And while he's bedridden, they slipped in another treaty. Another one with reservations. One more, so 2 votes with reservations. The last one, Wilson is incapacitated. By the way, nobody really knew what to do if the president's incapacitated then. There wasn't a constitutional amendment, so nowhere it said that. Today, now the Constitution has been amended, so if the president is incapacitated, the vice president takes over. They actually have an order of secession. But back to this. The third vote, so few more Democrats that were here joined to vote for it. Just a few reservations on Article 10. These guys joined. It got a majority of the members of the Senate. What does that mean? 2/3. Didn't get to 2/3. Got the majority. not 2/3.
Only 2/3 made a majority.
2/3 is a big majority, but majority is just 1 over 50%.
Oh,
Yeah. So what they got just over 50%, not the 67% they needed. It didn't ratify. The U.S. never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. So the U.S. is going to be isolationist. Yes, they're going to be involved. Yes, there's going to be some U.S. involvement with negotiation, but they're always going to be outside looking in. And then when the Great Depression happened, the whole world kind of became isolationist and unilateral, and that's part of the reason why when World War II happened, nobody was quite ready for the shock of this. Wilson would never quite recover. His presidency would be seen somewhat as a failure, and that would be the Ratification Battle. So we have liberals and conservatives, the disagreement between the liberals, there were probably more liberals at that time, and it was close. When they did add some reservations and Wilson couldn't resist, it almost passed. But it wasn't enough. So that begs the question, would it have passed if Wilson would have allowed a few reservations? Remember what I said, there were more people who were liberal. So would it have passed? Just maybe I'm just throwing rhetorical questions out there. Fine. So tomorrow, what are you going to have? You're going to have DBQ, pen, paper, bribe. All right? And this time I want non-negotiable government bonds. Those are the best, and there's no paper trail. That always becomes problematic. You know, somebody claims I'm extorting money from students for grades. And by the way, I'm recording all of this. It's all going nationwide, be extorting you for bribes.
Worldwide.
Ooh, worldwide. No, not China.
Not China.
They block it.
why do they block it?
China runs it